I am so glad that you're all here. And we are all here. Thank you so much for coming out on a cold November Sunday morning to be part of this class that continues our series on alternative, the radical Christian alternative. That's been our series, our theme all year long. Right now, we're concluding the whole part about the environmental justice. And we are so grateful for Tony, who's on here. Tony, thank you, Tony. And I am, in a sense, filling in for Andrew and Jen and anyone else who is really an expert on environmental issues. And I know you are, Tony, and so you may chime in anytime, interrupt me at any point, and I won't mind at all. Anyone else can do that as well. But we are concluding a 4-week time with this topic. And today we're going to continue what Jen and Andrew were doing last Sunday. They are now in Mexico with family, enjoying a holiday. And Brooke is the first time I think out of the country. And so I am here to gather up what they were talking about last week and finish that off and see where that takes us as a congregation. And so I'm wondering, CC, are you able to get this screen share? All right. We are cooking now. Thank you, everybody, to get us to this point. And so this is what we looked at last week. And we are going to move down into slide 17. And I'm doing that right now because I know as I scroll through this, you remember every part of these slides and have no questions, which is really cool. I really appreciate it. We are here on slide 17. And just a little background on the first 16 slides, trying to understand what climate change is, what it means to the world, how it affects especially other poor nations than ours. And here we are. Who causes climate change? Is it caused by population increase? To remind all of you again, now that we have the screen up, that we are dealing with this issue because it's something that faith communities need to grapple with. We talk a lot about social justice, but we can't do so without environmental justice as well. And so it's a very important topic. And at the end of this class, we'll see exactly what we might be able to do in your ideas on how we might make this place a place of environmental justice. So let's just go through some of these slides and then get to that topic for the whole congregation. As you see here, the 50 least developed countries are thought to have contributed just 1% of greenhouse gases to global warming. And U.S. is 4% of the world population, but consumes 1/3 of the world's natural resources. And that we produce 25% of the world's greenhouse gases. Any dispute over this? I've heard these before, and I just don't know what to do about it, except continue with our class series, what we might do together as a church. That's rather startling and rather, I don't know, in some ways embarrassing that we in the nation that think we're so far ahead of other places in so many ways are so far behind in grappling with climate change because we are such a huge part of the problem. And so let's see what they say. Who does climate change affect? Well, I think a lot of us know this already, but just seeing those little words you see on the screen, everyone feels the effect of climate change, but certainly more. Some people feel it more than others, and the wealthy countries don't feel it much. The poor countries certainly do. And so, now you must know that I can't see anybody on the screen. And so if you have something to share or say or ask a question, please simply raise your voice and I will stop and we can talk. And then We are back. We are back. And so I don't know if there's anyone that this is new information to, that climate change affects all of us, but especially the poorer countries. They seem to get the brunt of all of the greenhouse gases that we produce. They seem to be affected most. And so they're less able to adapt to climate change and therefore suffer the most of its effects. They're also less able to develop because they need to focus on addressing the challenges caused by climate change. All of this is happening right now. And if you notice the news that's going on right now in the climate talks, the nations, that there's that agreement that finally the U.S. has decided they would sign.
They participated.
Right, and so finally, after all these years, that they're getting on board to recognize the fact that this line is talking a reality for many countries. There are 153 or so that they're trying to get on board. They're on board and they need help. And so the U.S. is with the one dragging its feet. But here we are. I think it might be changing with that. So it's encouraging. And as it says here in the last point, it's a moral and spiritual issue that is causing unprecedented harm to God's creation and people. So let's see where it takes us in. I'm just yes, please, yes, Tom.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that's really challenging about this is that when we talk about developing or global south or less wealthy nations, we're talking about a lot of different kinds of people in a lot of different kinds of circumstances. So, we have the island nations, some of which are just going to plain disappear. We've got, the increasing encroachment of the desert in Africa and the impacts on food and so forth, and we've got flooding in Latin America, and just all of these different issues. And then in the wealthier nations, we have lower income people who are more marginalized, who have more exposure, more vulnerability, and fewer resources. And so when we sort of think about all of the people who are more severely impacted by climate change, that's a lot of different kinds of folks in lots of different places. And I think that one of the things that sometimes we do with sort of moral and spiritual issues like that is become overwhelmed and kind of compartmentalize or sort of shrink back because it just seems so much.
Good words, Tony. Thank you for filling that in more as we look at this huge issue, right? And even that's the kind of work you're doing in there in Louisville, and how important all of this is for the marginalized communities that are so more at risk with climate change. So let's keep going through some slides here. Look at this, climate justice is social justice, and that's so good to remember. Those least responsible are first and hardest hit by climate change. You can imagine 40 million global climate refugees. And then this, for every 1% centigrade decrease in global average temperature, a 10% reduction in world grain crops.
Wait, read that one more time, Harry.
For every 1% Celsius increase in global average temperature, there's a 10% reduction in the world's grain crops.
Goodness gracious. 10% seems like a lot to me.
It is a lot.
Yeah. Oh,
Given
yeah.
the population we have. Yeah.
Wow.
And if you can imagine, the World Bank says climate-related disasters push 26 million people into poverty every year.
Wow.
And so if you care about social justice, it says here, you need to care about the environment. If you care about the environment, you need to care about social justice. I don't think we can emphasize that enough. Sometimes we like to separate social justice from other issues like the environment. That's another thing over there. We're dealing with things here for social justice, but they are so connected. that we can't do that any longer. And so let's get that in our minds.
But you know, I think what Tony said earlier is that to me, it just seems so overwhelming that I keep thinking, you know, when I put something in the recycle bin and then everybody says, well, you know, they don't do anything with it when they get to the recycle plant anyway. And it's like, and I wonder, is that true? Do things really not get recycled when we even make an effort to do that? And it seems that it's so big that it's almost like, oh my gosh, what's the point? I mean, it's hard to think what is my part? Is it really going to make a difference? It's
The problem,
Yeah.
I think the problem is that being in Santa Fe in the middle of the Southwest, where there's no industry around, I know it takes, you know, more of a carbon footprint to get these things to industries that can use them. I know that happened with glass in Santa Fe. We used to truck it up to Golden, Colorado for Coors. And, you know, getting a big semi to go up and down those mountains to get all the way up there is kind of ridiculous. And so I do think with glass, they're not doing anything right now, but there's no market.
Yeah.
But they say first you reduce, reuse, and then recycle. We could probably all focus on reducing and not buying water bottles, plastic water bottles, etc., and reusing things instead of throwing them away. So we could perhaps focus on those two things.
Well,
As
and I was
individuals.
thinking I was really smart to buy these tiny little sheets of washing machine soap in just little sheets and putting a couple in, and it comes in like a cardboard sack. So you've done away with plastic, and I was feeling so good until I learned that to get these sheets to form their shape, you have to use this ever plastic. And
gee.
I know it's I'm on a regular refill from Amazon, and I'm thinking, uh-oh. So, you know, it's hard to find good answers.
I know. I think that it seems to me like everybody can't, or maybe not everybody, maybe Janice can't remember, but most of us in this room can remember when milk came in a real bottle and you took the bottle back and then you picked it up again, it had milk in it. Or if you got Cokes, they were in a real bottle and you returned the bottles and you got a refund and you got Cokes in a new bottle. But I wonder how much impact there is in cleaning all of that and repackaging it. It's just so often you wonder, you think, oh, well, if we could reuse everything, if you can wash it yourself, that's great. But if you send it to a company and they're going to rewash it, I mean, I bet you it's about the same amount of impact, frankly.
So
Go, Tony, tell me how I'm not discouraged.
no, well, so I think lots of people, I mean, we're all in this together, right? Lots of people feel really challenged by trying to get enough information to weigh the cost and benefits, and you do one thing that you think, when what you're saying, you do something that you think is good for the environment, and then you discover that there are all these other effects that and you're like, well, is that really worth it or not? And I think that the real danger of that is becoming discouraged. And I think one of the things is that as people of faith, we believe that when we are responsive to God's call to be good environmental stewards and to seek social justice, that it's not, we don't want to go around kind of being uneducated or ignoring these things or continuing on the same patterns when we learn that maybe it's not as effective. But I don't think we have to feel individually responsible for making, for achieving outcomes, right? I mean, I think that instead what we need to do is feel individually responsible for engaging in actions that as best we can understand, as best we know, are responsible, are good stewardship, are social justice and that sort of thing. And so I think one thing is that obviously we need to educate ourselves. I think another thing is that we need to be seeking systemic change, social change, institutional change. And so this goes to last week's discussion about what's happening in our political system. But the thing is that industries and government and so forth operate at a scale that none of us individually do, and so that they can address those sorts of things. That we're an entire system is working on improving how we recycle, or improving on how we reduce energy usage, or reduce our reliance on fossil fuels, or how we're going to help communities to adapt to climate change. All of that's going to happen at a broader institutional scale. And so, I see one of the biggest threats is the sort of power. I mean, so Harry talks about empire, right? I mean, and so the empire is not just the government, but it's also all of those economic interests, greed and that sort of thing that is resistant to doing things that protect and empower the poor, that protect the environment, sort of reliance on, the coal industry wants to keep going, right? The oil and gas industry wants to keep going. And so, when we are active politically and socially, that can make a difference. And then I think the third thing on this is first is we just do our best, right? We do our best and we trust God that God will honor us doing our best. Second is we engage in social and political and institutional change. And the third, I think, is that we partner with people who are most affected, who are most struggling, right? Whether you're recycling a plastic item or not is an action, but it might actually mean less than, say, for example, working with a Native American community that is, experiencing really, severe water impacts because of climate change, or, working with frontline communities that are experiencing pollution in industry, or, we have a relationship with folks in Cuba. And, Cuba is going to be on the front line of increasing hurricanes and storm surge and heat and so on and so forth. So I think that that's the sort of third thing, is sort of getting outside our own individual actions and thinking a bit about being part of community. Sorry, I got kind of carried away with the three-part sermon there.
No.
That actually helped, Tony.
Any responses or anything to add from what Tony was talking about? Yeah,
Yeah, I think it's a concerted effort, and I hope I'm expressing myself well, in between individual actions and corporate actions, as a church in this case, or, as groups, or as part of, let's say, the Sierra Club or Greenpeace, that can bring about change. But also how we vote with our money. If we have enough money to invest, how we invest in such a way that we don't invest in Coca-Cola, at least I don't, because I just don't like Coca-Cola. It stands for, it has created huge problems both in South America and here. By beginning to, with the cocaine. That's where the Coca-Cola name comes from.
Oh, I need that.
Yeah, and also, not investing in oil and gas and plastic. Well, oil is plastic is oil. But there is plastic now that is can be recycled, that can be composted. Yet the oil companies do not change because it's not in their interest to go to the other plastic. And they keep making plastic factories here in New Mexico and in the areas where people will need jobs. The areas where coal was used, a lot of the employees were Native Americans. And now they are going to plastic factories. So there is really no change there in an economic sense. And also advocating for changes in the law. Over time, the laws favor the huge companies that are creating the harm that we want to try to avoid. So we advocate for changes in that law to make them just, not so biased in favor of the companies and against us. It's like a global way of thinking once we are educated and know the implications, and how we consume things. Now it's almost impossible not to consume plastic. It comes in everything and everywhere. When plastic didn't exist, we didn't consume it, and there are places that have prohibited plastic for wrapping things that you buy in the market. They use leaves. That is what people used to do, so it's a very complicated issue because it's been coming along in short steps until it dominates our life. But we can back it up. I mean, we can speak up, we can take actions, and keep educating ourselves. And advocacy is number one. Last week we were talking about the elections, and I'm very happy with the results of the elections because of environmental issues. Most of those people are willing to listen, to be educated on how they are going to change legislative issues at many levels. Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
you mentioned there's been developed a biodegradable form of wrapping or plastic.
Yes.
I know that we've managed to get, well, they use them for leaves to pick up trash and so forth. Those are all theoretically biodegradable. I don't know how true that is, but there is that element at an individual level.
Mm-hmm.
And as you said, it's so complex because at the same time, we need industrial scale investment in the development of biodegradable plastic
Right.
production.
Right.
What does that take? And what is the church's responsibility at that level in the empire of God?
Well, let's say I buy at the natural grocers, right? And they use that biodegradable plastic. But I go to Albertsons or to Smith's or to Sprouts even. Well, I can go and talk to the Sprouts management or, the corporation, tell them, I'm not going to buy from you unless you change your plastic, things like that.
I know CC had something to say
Yeah.
earlier. Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna key off of what Mary said about milk in glass bottles. I happen to grow up in the area where, in an era when you had that. And if you look at it on a micro scale, where you live, that wasn't too big of a problem.
Yeah, I never knew. I just, that's.
However, if you want to take it to a macro scale, which companies do for growth, you need to ship that milk to places other than local. And if you have glass bottles, that is much more susceptible to breakage and loss than if you put it in a plastic device that has some give without breaking. It's more economical for the company.
Of course it
The
is.
problem is they don't pass that savings along to you. I personally believe that we can sit here and toss darts all we want to at corporate greed and all the other stuff. But corporations are not the ones that throw plastic bottles in the borrow pit. You know, they're not the ones who, I'll just throw this away, you know, it's a big country. I mean, when I first went to Alaska, this was in 1974. I was appalled at how much people mistreated the environment. When I was there were more miles of air runways than there was roads that you could drive a vehicle on. And people who, you know, they would pull up to these trash bins that the state had put out there. And if they had an RV, they just pulled the levers, they just dumped it right there. You know, that, you know, and what does that do? That brings all sorts of nasty people. But until we as a group decide that we're not going to live in a throwaway society and say we're going to change our personal practices here.
Right.
Now, I've heard a rumor that we recycle glass here, but in reality, we don't. People pick up the glass, they dump it in landfill. Well, I have a, you know, glass does not decay. I mean, we're digging glass out of, you know, several hundred years ago. So we're going to have to get serious about setting up facilities that get rid of that consumer product when it's over and recycle it. We're going to have to make a profit, you know, for them to do it. And we're going to have to invest in it. We're going to have to pass some laws to do it. And that is the only way you're going to be able to do it. If you take a look at an aluminum can, soda can. If you live in California, Maine, and I don't know what the other two, you have to pay, you know, anywhere from 2 to 5 cents extra for that can, right? So that it can be picked up and recycled. You know, so if you reduce the amount of disposable income by taking part of that to clean up after our bad behaviors, I think you could reduce that sort of thing. And I mean, yeah, you can tax corporations, But anybody knows anything about business knows that that tax is just passed along to the consumer. So if you want to stop that, then you tack it from this end. You know,
I'm gonna let other voices get in here. Yeah. There's a lot to say, but I wanna make sure maybe.
oh, yeah.
Hands raised, and I can't see.
Okay,
Thanks, CC. Anybody on the screen that I can't see that would like to add something before we move into the next and last thing is, what we can do here as a faith community, right? Larger groups of churches, let's say, and we'll just start there. But anything else on this whole subject, anybody?
Harry, can you go up one more slide, go back one slide and show the 4 degrees, the 1 degree, 2 degree, 3 degree, 4 degree? Because I think that's really shocking and it'd be really interesting. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Tony. Climate change is happening faster than predicted. Look at this. We're already there. The planet has warmed 1 degree centigrade since the Industrial Revolution. That's a long time ago. Okay, so. But 2,
1700.
yeah, a goal of Paris Agreement, extinction of the world's reefs, sea level, rise of several meters, abandonment of the Persian Gulf, long-term disaster. This is it goes.
Wait, read that again here.
Goal of Paris Agreement is in here. The extinction of the world's reefs, sea level rise of several meters, abandonment of the Persian Gulf, equals long-term disaster.
Wow.
So the Paris Agreement is the best we can do if we really get serious about reducing our carbon footprint is to limit the increase in temperature to 2 degrees Celsius, which is going to leave parts of the world uninhabitable, even at that level. And if we don't do something, we're headed for 3 degrees or 4 degree increase, which I'll let you carry.
Okay, thank you, Tony. I just thought I didn't get that at all.
Okay, so the 1, 2, 3, 4 of them.
Or degrees.
It increases, and what happens in those degrees? And so 2 is what Tony just talked about. This is what the Paris Agreement is trying to keep it at. But look, by keeping it, we have these things happen. The world's reefs are extinct and so forth. Number 3, look, number 3. If we don't do the Paris Agreement, with 2, we have a short-term disaster, forest in the Arctic, loss of most coastal cities, current realistic minimum. That's what the minimum of what we're talking about. Now look at that third sentence, loss of most coastal cities.
Wow. Yeah, we will.
And that's the 3 degrees. Okay, now, if you're brave enough to go to 4, or not paying attention enough to go to 4, then look at this. Europe in permanent drought, deserts covered, China, India, Bangladesh. And but where do we live?
The desert.
American Southwest,
Yeah.
uninhabitable. So now it starts to hit on even more so than what these other things are. And you say, we can't do that. But when it's Santa Fe, we say, wait a second, that's 4 degrees. So thank you, Tony. This is a startling realization here. Okay, we have
And just 1 degree, remind me again, because it said earlier, the 1 degree, Tony, is not, how many years is 1 degree? I mean, it takes a while for that, but it happens quicker than you would think, right?
Right. So the 1 degree has already happened. So we've increased 1 degree Celsius since the Industrial Revolution. But if you look at the trajectory, that was on a previous slide, we've already put so much carbon in the atmosphere that it's difficult to just pull it out. And so we're already on a trajectory. So that's why the Paris Agreement is saying, well, if we can limit global warming to, and here they say we need to reduce our emissions by 2030 by 45% if we're going to limit our increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And so that's the idea. But if we don't reduce our carbon emissions, we're headed to 3 or 4 degrees Celsius increase. And I think I'm trying to remember when that is, but maybe by the end of the century or something. So it'll be beyond our time. But the problem is we're creating this scenario and sort of locking it in for our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, that sort of thing. And so, you know, the point that was on that slide about the time to act is in the next 10 to 15 years. That's what people are saying based on the projections and how, you know, the climate doesn't just auto correct instantly. It takes a long time. That's why we've had ice ages and, you know, hotter periods, you know, the glaciers melting and so forth. But the problem is we're causing it to change, and we're at a pretty rapid rate.
Thank you, Tony. That helped a lot.
Okay, Tony, this is Cece. I have one real quick statement. You say yay or nay.
Sure.
If I remember right, the United States did not sign on to the Paris Agreement. Is that correct?
Yeah.
They did not initially, but we did. So after President Biden took office, we signed on to the Paris Agreement.
Right.
And so, yeah.
We're gonna unsign.
So we had the 8 years that George W. Bush was in office, plus the 1 year that Trump was in office, for which we did not. We withdrew basically from the Paris Agreement. Is that also true?
No, I think the Paris Agreement's been more recent than that. What we have, so this meeting is COP. It's Council of Parties, Conference of Parties, something like that. But it's all the nations, and then there are various representatives of, you know, nonprofit and environmental organizations and human rights organizations and industry and business and so forth. But anyway, they meet and the nations come up with a new agreement every year or two, and they keep trying to move it forward. So the big one was, the very first one was, I think, Rio in 1992. So we've been working on this for a long time. But the Paris Agreement was sort of a breakthrough in terms of what the nations were willing to commit to do. And so, you know, that there was some agreement, but then the US didn't join that. And I think that was in the Trump administration when they refused to. I think it started in the Obama administration, but by the time it came for ratification by the US, it was we were, you know, not ratifying. And but then, you know, there have been several others. There's been Copenhagen, that's been, you know, so they meet in different cities, and they're trying to keep developing further implementation actions, new agreements. So I just saw something recently that said the Biden administration had been resisting a fund to help the developing countries most adversely affected by climate change, and they finally just agreed in the last day or so, that the US government agreed in the last day or so. So, you know, even when we have administrations that are sort of more favorable to action on climate change, there's still sort of resistance, sort of looking out for our, you know, economic interest as a nation and so forth.
Very good. Tony, I'm so grateful for your voice and
No joke.
to help us get situated here. We have maybe, I believe, about 5 minutes at the end of the service, but I would like to conclude this class. We have about 5, maybe at most 10 minutes to figure out what we do here in the church to help this whole issue. We have solutions, it says on this slide. Our actions can make a difference, it says, with photographs. But what can we do as a congregation to do our little part here, our little triangle of Santa Fe, that may then ripple out to others when they get an idea that, hey, First Pres is doing something. Maybe I need to, that kind of idea. Presbyterian's having a meeting here in February. We're going to Consuelo right now. He's on the on the, what do you, Earth Care Group, Presbyterian or what?
Yeah, Air Care, the Presbyterian Air Care Committee.
Right.
And we are part also of the National Presbyterian Committee on Environmental Issues that was responsible for taking some money that the church had invested in oil companies out of them.
Okay, great. So on a big level, taking money out of and investing in the oil company
Right.
down to individual churches.
Right.
And we have, churches are known to be often older buildings that just leak out energy. They don't have enough money to kind of fix things up. They don't have the money to build new buildings. Instead, these things are obsolete in many ways, but we hold on to them because we know the option we have. But we can do things. And so right now, just to finish up our class right now, to be this radical Christian alternative to what we might have done in the past, or see other groups around us not quite there yet, and we get there. What can we do to reduce our footprint? And just ideas, I have a little pad of paper putting down to let you also know we're getting an audit done by New Mexico Interfaith Power and Light group. Two scientists, I think, are coming in a few weeks from now to look at our whole church and say, here's what you're doing now, but we can suggest you do differently to reduce your footprint. But what's your ideas right now so that in this rest of the morning here on Sunday morning, can we make a difference?
Well, first off, we need to change from incandescent light to LED light. That in and of itself would make a huge difference. I think we're getting an audit done. I'm real anxious to see that because if I understand correctly, our sanctuary is adobe, which is the most efficient building material you can possibly have. We also have very small windows in our sanctuary. So I think people have already a predisposed idea that our sanctuary will be very inefficient and kind of an energy hog. My personal feeling is I think we're going to find that's the most efficient part of our entire complex here, just because of its building material. So it's just the one thing that Andrew said last week that it's like, I need to let Andrew know. I mean, I can't tell you how many lights I've seen on and thought, whoops. I mean, Andrew challenged us at our home and here that if we're not using a light, then you turn it off. You don't just turn it on in the morning and it stays on until, oh gosh, I never turned that off. And it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I mean, I think it's things like little things, at least that it's being aware. That's what this class is doing for me, is making me more aware of what I'm doing.
I know they're gonna say they need to turn off all the coffee makers.
Forget that. Oh. Well, that just isn't gonna happen, George.
We won't do that. That's what we thought.
All right, that comes back to, what I was saying, we as individuals, as the end consumers, and we are going to have to get our act together, clean up after ourselves. Write your legislatures, whatever it says. We need to be able to recycle. We can turn lights off. I mean, it doesn't sound like very much, but it's just like if every person on the earth picked up a grain of sand and put it in the same pie, how high of a sand dune would you have? You got to think of it in that terms. It doesn't take that much effort. It takes a lot of discipline. And by and large, we have become a fairly undisciplined population when it comes to taking care of our environment. It just,
So
and I look at we have solutions. I look at two of them up there. I see solar panels, and I see an electric car. How many lower income people in New Mexico do you think can afford either one of them?
So other ideas then, before I have to leave, Consuelo, and then anyone online after that? Yeah, what's that?
Well, there is a legislative effort right now to help low-income people to put solar in their homes. So that's a plus. In other words, they'll be given the money to do it
Mhm.
because economically, overall, it makes sense. And economically, it makes sense to help Mother Nature. We either do it or we are doomed.
I mean, quite honestly, there should be no building in the state of New Mexico that does not have solar.
That does not
panels.
have solar, yeah.
We're not in Cleveland anymore, so I'm thinking about my own situation. I had to leave to go to the morning song service. This conversation can certainly continue, but I want to make sure that you know that next Sunday, we are having a presentation by those who went to Cuba. To find out what we did, what we saw, what they're doing down there. We talk about people having to deal with a world with few resources.
Right.
It's Cuba and how precious they look at the earth because of that. So thank you all for today. We can continue. I'm so, can we get this, maybe get this off so people can see each other if they want
What
to
is
still
that
stay.
in the middle?
Cece, and I'm gonna have to move on, but I really appreciate it. Thank you all. For that.
What's over here on the side?
I wish it had said what they were.
No, because I couldn't see the only one I could recognize was the solar panels.
We're on the oil, the car.
Okay. But I heard like, I don't know. It was one of my crazy Texan friends, so it may not be accurate. But with electric cars, once it goes, there's just fields of electric car batteries and you can't do anything with them. And so that just creates like another kind of like refuse that is like detrimental to us totally.
Well, there are scientists right now working on changing that.
Oh, that's good. Okay.
Yeah. And also on having a different type of battery that won't use, the harmful ingredients that it has
Okay.
right now. So there is hope. I mean, we have tremendous mental power with scientists that are good, not the bad ones.
So
That's good.
I had just sort of a thought to throw out. I mean, I think it would be amazing if the church really vastly reduced its energy usage. I think that would be amazing. But I think what would be even more amazing is if we took all that cost savings and put it into an environmental justice fund to help the most disadvantaged communities that are affected by climate change. And so do it have an effect both ways, both in terms of our reduction in contribution to climate change, but also creating a fund with that savings to help the marginalized communities, whether it's in Cuba or in New Mexico or maybe multiple places.
Tony, I would find it really helpful to have, I don't know where to go even to find the information. Like, what can I do in my house? Alice was talking about the laundry sheets. I changed to those. Now she's saying that, there's some problem with those. And maybe they're still better than the liquid. I don't know. But if we could compile for our people a list of resources or websites or something, the more concise, the better. But something we could trust was good advice. That'd be very helpful.
That would be great. Yeah.
I think Earth Keepers, so the Earth Keepers, so they put out something pretty much almost every day with some sort of tip. So it's nice to sort of see, kind of in your daily, whether it's email or social media or whatever. But then of course there's a website. And so Andrew and Jen do a lot of really gathering great ideas. And I think, again, kind of going back to that idea of sort of best efforts. I mean, any changes are positive changes. And so like, I think, you were asking about this the other day. And for me, one of the things that was a positive difference was, I put up a line in my basement, and I use my dryer for towels and, and sort of thick socks, but everything else goes on the line. And, that just saves, that's one thing I've done. One thing I don't do is, I don't, in the winter, I definitely have the heat where it's comfortable. I hate to feel cold and when my hands get cold typing and so forth. So I'm just that's one of my trade-offs. So I feel like, okay, well, I'm doing all this stuff on the computer. I got to keep my house warm enough that my hands don't get cold. But then like in the summer, I don't mind being warmer. So I keep the air conditioning off a lot of the time. And so it's just, I think trade-offs are things to sort of think about, that people can do, but the Earth Keepers is a really great source of lots of really key insights. And so like, for example, I think you were asking about the pictures. One of the pictures had to do with food, and the more that you have a more plant-based diet, the better that is for the environment. Now, I like meat, so I'm kind of making choices there, but since the since the sort of really tasty Impossible Burgers and Beyond Burgers came out, that was a place where I thought, okay, I can switch. I'm still going to enjoy my steak, but I can go for the plant-based burger that tastes really good, and it's my little bit that I'm doing. So those are just some examples, but I don't think I think if you sort of spend tons of time just kind of worrying about every little thing, that ends up becoming more of a discouragement than positive action.
One thing also, and what the pastor asked was, what can the church as a whole do? And the church is still consuming energy from, sources that are not environmentally safe. But if this church were to go to solar panels, it would also make sense economically, because the investment on solar panels always pays off by the production first of a source of energy that doesn't harm the environment, and also with monetary issues. The expense that the church is having right now by not having solar panels, its own source of energy, is very high.
That's also something that would be a semi-impact on the community.
Right.
That is, if First Press decided to put solar panels on, maybe we should consider it. Or maybe the government should consider it on XYZ building. Certainly the schools have done that.
Yeah.
Almost every school that has a parking lot, I've lost her name right immediately here, but she's in charge of working environmentally on each of the schools. So there might be solar panels over the parking lot, but then there's a garden in the backyard, et cetera, et cetera.
It seems to me that especially the municipal buildings that have used solar panels for shading of cars that are parked too, is just brilliant. I mean, we did that in one of our complexes in Phoenix, and it was amazing. Our entire parking garage, the roof has solar panels, and that shades the cars that park underneath. And when it's 119 degrees, it makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
Well, if you go over to the HEC building here in Santa Fe, the parking lot is covered
Oh, no, it's solar panels.
with solar, with solar panels.
Right.
I mean, one of the state buildings over here, it's the same way. I mean, we talk about what can we do for the lower income people? Why can't the government here just purchase solar panels to have them installed where the people could pay, an additional 1, 2, 3% in their property tax to purchase that over the life of the house.
Or how about the same with each of the communities of trailers, house trailers that are along Airport Road and even up Cerrillos? What if there was a requirement that they cover parking areas or even the trailers themselves to generate electricity?
I mean, that's part of it, but there are more lower income people in this state than there are in those parking lots. And I think we need to look at that problem. Because, it give them some relief. So we've got to think about big things that we could do. I remember reading an article about somebody, they had a container and they had a bunch of rocks here, and how many of the rocks could you get in that container? Well, people just started tossing them in there. Well, nobody got all the rocks in there until the professor said, put the big rocks in first. Then start filling up the gaps with the smaller ones. And he said, if you do that, that container can hold all of those rocks. So we need to think in reverse rather than little steps. Let's take one big step and then start putting smaller steps in there.
That's right.
And it's just because low income people can change some of their habits, but not all of the habits that they do. My guess is they're probably more diligent in turning lights off than we as wealthier people are.
Because they don't have that much money.
They don't have that much money.
Yeah.
They got to keep their utility bills down. They got to keep their grocery. I mean, they have to keep everything down.
Mhm.